So I just wanted to give you a very, very brief welcome to the Life After Life Club. Glad to see you all. Our guest this morning is William Peters. He's the author of At Heaven's Door, a brand new book about the group that he formed in Ventura. And so let's just welcome William Peters as the author. It's going to be good.
Thank you. Thank you, Marion, for that warm introduction. And Mary, welcome to the presidency. That's not such a good job description nowadays, but we'll go forward here. I'm going to open up my PowerPoint, so bear with me while I do that. So I'm going to be talking about really primarily what is now known in the field as the shared death experience. This is an experience where somebody dies and a loved one or caregiver, or sometimes a healthcare worker or even a bystander expresses that they share in the journey from this human life into the afterlife with somebody who's dying. But a little bit about me before we dive into that. I am a psychotherapist by training. I work at the Family Therapy Institute in Santa Barbara, California. I'm a senior staff member there. I specialize in end-of-life counseling, and I also have worked as a really what they call a transpersonal psychotherapist, and that is that people with spiritual issues, primarily relating to extraordinary experiences. That's my perspective. I'm a psychotherapist. I'm into this work because I have found that it provides profound healing and insight for people who have these experiences, but are currently our medical system and healthcare system doesn't have an accurate perception of what's really going on for people. So with that, I should also say I am an experiencer. I had 2 near-death experiences myself, and also worked in hospice for a good period of time. So everything I'm sharing with you today in terms of the psychic or spiritual terrain we're going to be exploring, I have personal experience with, as well as the research, a good deal of research on it. So with that, I'm going to dive in. So here's what I want to talk about. I want to introduce the Shared Crossing Project and its research initiative and the study we recently have published. And then I want to talk about this study in terms of what is so significant about its findings. I'm going to introduce shared death experience. We call those SDEs, SDE typologies. These are the first typologies that have ever been presented backed by rigorous academic research. I'm going to also focus on the therapeutic aspects for experiencers. And I'm going to review a new aspect of the shared death experience that I found in the last few years. I kind of had a sense for this, but now as I've focused my research team to look into we have over 250 analyzed cases. We've got another 150 we're going to dive into pretty soon about this element called the conductor. There seems to be a force in during a transition that we see in the SDE, this force that tends to be managing the transition of souls from this human life into an afterlife. And it's a fascinating function that I'm going to spend some time with today. Then I'm going to talk a little bit more about learning opportunities for people who want to study the SDE or learn more about it, or actually have an SDE themselves, talk about how they can actually do that. So here's the Shared Crossing Project. I started this project in 2011, really, is when I started doing groups. But the mission is pretty straightforward. It's to transform people's relationships to death and dying through education and raising awareness about these shared crossing experiences and their healing benefits. The research initiative is a multidisciplinary team. You see Dr. Monica Williams in the middle. She is our medical director, and she is an emergency room or emergency department physician. So she looks at this from a very medical perspective, and it's been extremely helpful for us to have Monica on our team, providing us language that interfaces well with the healthcare system. We have Dr. Kinsella. He's has a PhD in religious studies and cognitive sciences, and he's our chief of research. And then you have me as the director and principal investigator, and I come at this from a mental health background, so you see we really try to cover it from a variety of different disciplinary angles. What we really do is we collect and we analyze these shared crossing accounts. As I said before, it's all about the therapeutic benefits. We would not be doing this work based on just the fascination or stimulation of the phenomena, because it is absolutely spellbinding and awe-inspiring, the phenomena. But we're not so much interested in that. We are interested in the therapeutic value, the way this improves people's quality of life and their relationships with their loved ones. We advocate for education about shared crossings, and we provide education about shared crossings. So you say, what is a shared crossing? So generally speaking, a shared crossing is an end-of-life phenomena that suggests loving communication across the veil, an ongoing connection with our departed loved ones. And this is the spectrum of end-of-life experiences that I created about 10 years ago as a clinician, because I had people who would come to me for end-of-life counseling and also grief and bereavement. And I found that when I asked this question, hey, I'm wondering if you had any unusual experiences, maybe mystical or spiritual. Just want to make sure that we include that in our therapy. And invariably, people would kind of sit back in their chair, roll their eyes a little bit, look at me and say, it's funny you asked that, because I had this experience. And this experience, if it was for them, 1 or 2 or 3 experiences, these are the experiences that I found in my clinical office. And I'm going to go through these briefly, but my talk today is really about the peak pinnacle experience, the shared death experience, which is on the top of this chart. But all these other experiences come up, and they're all, quite frankly, very meaningful and in many ways, sit outside of our understanding from a healthcare perspective of what's possible for the human experience. So the first is pre-death premonitions. This is knowing in advance that you or someone you love are going to die. These can happen years in advance, but we see them mostly a few months in advance. Pre-death visions and visitations. These are well known in the field of psychotherapy and anthropology and religious studies. These are visions or visitations from the deceased or spirit beings who come to the dying to tell them, your time is coming, get ready, we're going to be here for you, we're waiting for you, but get ready to begin this journey. We see pre-death and at death and after death synchronicities of all kinds. These synchronicities can be things as seemingly simple as you are take a post-death situation where your relative has died, a loved one has died, you're driving in your car and you hear a song come on and you think of your loved one. And then you say to yourself, wow, that's his favorite song. And then you say, wow. And then his second favorite song comes on. And then you say, wow, if I hear this song, then I know he's talking to me. And his third favorite song comes on. Now that comes right out of our research. We have people who literally say, when I'm thinking of my loved one, this music comes on, and other experiences like electrical phenomena are extremely common. So you may see digital displays, ovens, clock radios, car displays, what have you, flash birth dates, anniversaries with frequencies that go far above the reasonable probability. And so the sense of coincidence is logically dashed for the sense of, replaced by a sense of, this is synchronistic. There's more going on here than just chance. And we have run the numbers on this. Actually, we don't run the numbers, but we send them to our quantitative people, share our data, and they're like, you guys, this is definitely well beyond coincidence. So, and we're not the only people. In fact, we're not even the leaders in studying synchronicities. There's a whole group of researchers who are saying that at the time of death and around death, there are supernatural experiences, unexplainable, that seem to suggest something beyond what we would call normal. And what we call that is a shared crossing, a sense that our deceased loved ones are trying to reach out to us. Okay, moving on. Terminal lucidity. These are physiologically unexplainable behaviors at the end of life. So persons with Alzheimer's who have been unresponsive for months, suddenly a few hours or days before they actually transition, open their eyes, look around the room, and recount to their loved ones what they've been doing in their life. In other words, they say to a grandson, "Hey, how's your baseball team doing? Because I know that you guys are doing better than you thought. And I'm so sorry to hear that Johnny hurt himself in the game last week." And you're like, "What, Grandma? You mean we thought you were unconscious?" And in fact, terminal lucidity suggests that the dying, in this case with Alzheimer's, seems to have a consciousness that's very much aware of the people in his or her life. The shared death experience we're going to go into today, I've already given a brief definition, but we'll go into it a bit later. The direct post-death communication, these are communications that happen soon after the death of a loved one, where the experiencer, that being the surviving loved one, will say, "You know, I was just thinking about the funeral, for example, and all of a sudden my mother's voice came into my mind saying, I think you need to seat Uncle Harry next to Aunt Marge. And by the way, when you give your eulogy, I want you to talk about the times we had in Hawaii together." And so the experiencer says, it was like my deceased loved one was in my mind, answering questions I didn't even know I had. So that's another experience in our spectrum. And then we have post-death visions and visitations. And these are very common. I'd say about 40% of all persons who get interviewed in grief and bereavement report that they feel that their deceased loved one has visited them either visually or in some significant way. The most common way we see in our research is the deceased appear at the foot of the surviving loved one's bed or up in the ceiling. They look younger, they're vital, and they come with a very clear message. You see that I'm alive and well. I love you. Go on with your life. I'll help. I'm available for you if you call out to me, and I will see you again. And these are what we see in our visitation. So by way of introduction to the larger basket of research that the Shared Crossing Project conducts, I'm going to invite all of you on this call, if you have any of these experiences, to submit them to the Shared Crossing Project, and we will research them, and I'll show you what we do with our research right now. So the Spectrum of End-of-Life Experiences was recently published in the Omega, the Journal of Death and Dying. This is the leading academic journal in the world on pretty much anything having to do with death and dying, but it tends to be focused on death education and hospice care. And we submitted this as a tool for advancing death education and to be used in hospice, to be used in gerontology, to be used wherever people are dying. And we suggest it should be used well in advance, but our culture is not quite ready for that. But just to say that this is where our research goes, and we support the growing understanding for these phenomena. So what's a shared death experience? It's an experience in which a loved one, caregiver, or bystander feels that they're sharing in a dying person's transition into a benevolent afterlife. Now, I use the term benevolent because that's what comes out in our research, expressed in different ways. A glorious afterlife, a realm that I couldn't even imagine, so beautiful, so heart-opening. I felt like I was one with everyone. These are the terms we hear to describe what our shared death experiencers report during their journey into the afterlife, the initial stages of the afterlife with their departing loved ones. The dominant motif is journey. And we'll talk more about that as we move through this presentation. The themes are love and understanding, feeling sublime feelings of love, often expressed as ineffable, and understanding, this heightened sense of awareness or wisdom or consciousness that's often expressed as, when I was in that state, I had answers to all of my questions. I knew the meaning of life and the deepest mysteries of the universe. Relationships appear to be central. That is to say, the bond between the shared death experiencer and the dying is really important. So typically, this is why loved ones have these experiences, but we also see hospice workers who bond deeply with their patients in their moment of need, who also have the shared death experience. The features are almost identical to the near-death experience, and we'll explore that right now. So here are the common features that are found both in the SDE and the NDE. And what I want to say is that what you can read over these features, because I know your group is familiar with NDE, so I don't need to say them. You can read them. But what's different is, well, it's the obvious. The obvious of this is this. Both the SDE and the NDE are looking at the same landscape, the same afterlife or initial stages of the afterlife geography. What's different is the vantage point. The shared death experiencer is not having a brush with death. And what they are having is they are hitching a ride with the dying, and they are viewing the initial stages of the afterlife as shown to them in the journey being experienced by the person who's dying. This is articulated clearly in this slide. NDE experiencers are actually having an experience of a brush with death. There is some sort of stress on their body that is causing them to have this experience. They're leaving their physical body and they're entering into the next dimension. The shared death experience is completely different in terms of the status in the health of the experiencer. To be clear, the SDE experiencer is healthy in mind and body. They are simply at the bedside or remote. Most of our cases are remote at the time of death of a loved one. All right, so we published the first academic article ever in medical sciences, and we were quite honestly blessed and fortunate that the leading journal in hospice and palliative care, known as the American Journal of Hospice and Palliative Medicine, published our research on the SDE. And I was, quite frankly, blown away by the responses of the reviewers, because the reviewers said things like, thank you for conducting this research. We all know these experiences happen, but no one was ever able to, up to this point, gather enough cases. Thank you for offering the first typologies of these experiences. And we suspect this is going to open up more research in an aspect of hospice and palliative care that has been lacking in attention. So this is a seminal article, according to the reviewers, and I think there'll be a lot more research. And we're going to be doing a lot of that, but the field is opening up for sure. So I just want to summarize a few of our key findings as we dive into this. First to note is most previous work done by primarily Dr. Raymond Moody found that SDEs were bedside phenomena, while our research suggested that almost 2/3, 64%, occurred remotely. That means not at bedside, down the hall, across town, other side of the globe. Here's another fascinating finding. 67%, more than 2/3 of our respondents, engaged in some type of meditative activity. So this suggests that meditation, prayer, contemplation, yoga, consistent practices of being in nature as well helped or seemed to enable the SDE. We need to keep that in mind. Here is the most basic typology. I have a more complex one in a moment, but here's the most basic one. There are two types of SDEs. There's bedside and then there's remote. The remote is just simply not at bedside. It can be, like I said, in another part of the house, another part of the hospital, another part of the world. There are two subtypes, and this is fascinating because the time of death does not seem to be required to have an SDE. In other words, about 9% of our SDEs happen a few moments, hours, and in a few cases, a day or two in front of the actual medically determined time of death. That is, stopping of heart rate and cessation of brain waves. We also have another 14% that happen after death, a few minutes, hours, and in some cases, a few days. We also have gradual SDEs, which happen over hours and in some cases days and seem to ebb and flow. So time seems not to be a determining factor in the SDE. We also have more than one person having an SDE. We call this a multi-person SDE. So you can imagine people, some at bedside and family members at bedsides, family members in another part of the world having an SDE as well, near or at the time of death. And the SDE phenomena can be similar, but it can also be a bit varied. Here's the dominant typology that I created. And I did it because I wanted to focus on what is the actual experience of the SDE experiencer. And there are four basic modes. They're non-exclusive. There's remotely sensing at a distance. There's witnessing unusual phenomena. There's accompanying the dying, and there's assisting the dying in transitioning. And we'll go over each of these in detail. The first is remotely sensing the death. This is 25% of our cases. This is brief thoughts, feelings, a sense of presence at the time of death, and also a sudden onset of sympathetic physical symptoms. So I'm going to show a case right now, a video case that will give you a good idea for what we're talking about. Because, when you're just talking about these experiences and giving definitions, sometimes it can be a little hard to grasp. This is Dawn. And Dawn is going to be sharing an SDE she had with her son. Very sad situation. Sean was going to get married about a week after he died in a car crash, or not being in a car crash. He was struck by a car and died. But listen to Dawn describe what she experienced at the moment of death of her son, Sean.
I truly had the physical symptoms, being nauseated, almost passed out, couldn't see, took off my glasses, everything went black, then it came back right away. I almost told my husband, but things just happened so fast. Within 4 minutes, I'm getting a phone call that he was hit. And then just right after that, oh my gosh, that's so weird. I just felt that. I felt what happened. I've had a premonition, and I've told everybody, I felt my kid the moment he died. I always said that if that's the only blessing that I get, I won't ask for anything else. I've only had 3 small dreams about him in the 3 years, and 2 of them were in the very beginning, then another one, along the way. And I always say, if I don't get any other blessings, I'm okay, because I had this blessing that I think really, truly has helped me walk a different path, a better healing path, a more coping path than a lot of other moms.
But I don't even speak at Compassionate Friends, because in the beginning, it's like, my son and his best friend died. This is what I felt. This is the time that it happened. In the beginning, I would say this stuff, and it was like the shocker of the story. And I don't want to always be that person, but I've said since day one, I will stand on my rooftop as a normal, average American who makes average money, who has an average life, who has 3 decent children, that doesn't take any medicine, that this is what happened to me. I feel like I felt my son as he passed from this earth.
So there you hear Dawn really giving a powerful testimony, really, to this sense that at the moment of death, or soon after, she felt her son, Sean, leave this earth. And she felt an energetic, when she gives a little bit more detail in other parts of the interview, but she basically feels like Sean kind of went through her and left left his body. And this is what we call sensing a death at a distance. It's the most basic, if you will, type of SDE, but the experiencer has a sense that someone they know and care about has died. And it's an energetic, it's a felt sense. And the term we hear all the time is, I just knew, I had a knowing that my loved one had died. The second type of mode of participation is witnessing unusual phenomena. Now, if you look at this list here that I provided, you'll see that after you see the vision of the dying being the most common, 51%, the rest of these phenomena are almost all related to the NDE phenomena. Now, once again, I'm not going to go into great detail about these because I know that your group has been studying this and been aware of these phenomena because you have a number of NDE presenters. But this is the most common mode of participation. 84% of our participants, in terms of our interviewees, express some of these phenomena. And the most common one being the vision of the dying. So that is that the shared death experiencer sees the dying primarily, sees the dying, not just senses the dying. That would be mode of participation number one. No, this is a visual capturing or witnessing of the dying moving along this journey in the afterlife. So we're going to listen now to Sally Light. Now, Sally, this is I chose this case for you all today because this case is a very specific type of phenomena. She's going to be seeing the spirit of her mother departing from her mother's body, and she's right at bedside. Sally gives a really beautiful description of this. So let's listen and we'll come back on the flip side.
This membranous type thing come away from the whole periphery of her body. And it was defined. It was definitely an edge. And as it came apart, coming up from the body to fill this thing was like this gray stuff. And I say stuff because, I've been thinking about this since I talked to you guys, and I just cannot put my hand on anything specific to tell you what it was like. I mean, yeah, foggy. No, it had a little more particulate stuff to it. It was something in this form at this time solid enough that it was still in a three-dimensional thing for me to see. So it moved, though. It congealed, and it slowly came together around her. And this membrane, and I think this had to be three-dimensional, but I could only see 2 dimensions in this thing. So this membrane opened like this and started going up towards the corner as a little bit, like a feather edge started going up of the grayish stuff, started going up with the tunnel. I called it a tunnel. I don't know if it was three-dimensional, but anyhow. And as it started to go up, the rest started to follow more solid. Now I'm picturing the room. I'd say about halfway up to that corner, it started going a little faster from the body, and the corner and a little less fast up to the corner where it started to disappear, this tube and the edges of the tube anyhow. And it just kept going up, and soon it was all out of her body and almost all disappeared at the top until the very last bit just went up fast. Once she's up in the corner there, I'm looking up there just I know she's up there. And I feel this love come into my body. It just was so wonderful. It just poured into my body, and I didn't get goosebumps or anything. It just was love and filled me totally. And I smiled, and probably was, I don't know if I was more than smiling, but I know I was extremely happy, extremely happy. After a while, she was back. I think she was looking at them. And then after a while, she came back to me and she sent me a message. It wasn't just the love that I felt before. It was different. It was like, oh, I am so full of joy. I'm so happy. This is her. And I felt that. I felt her.
So Sally does a really eloquent job of explaining, sharing with us her relationship with what she calls a membranous grayish structure that we call in the research kind of manifestation or representation of soul, spirit leaving body. And she follows it up the wall up to the ceiling. And then she has a relationship, a communication, contact with her mother. But the substrate of this relationship is love. The words that she uses to describe what she's feeling, what she knows her mother's feeling, because her mother says to her, or doesn't so much say to her, kind of communicates to her energetically that she's so happy and so filled with joy. So this is a second mode of participation. This is the sense of experiencing or witnessing or feeling these profound phenomena associated with death. Okay, we're going to move on to the third mode of participation, and this is accompanying the dying into the afterlife. And so let's read, I'm going to kind of go over this really quick, because what really happens is the shared death experiencer now participates in this journey, accompanying the dying, and they are often in a visionary realm, a heavenly realm, and they're progressing along with the dying on this journey. And the key themes here are ascension or movement, typically upwards and towards a light. The landscape is almost always beautiful. It can be more earthly landscapes of meadows and pastures. That's the most common thing we see, is meadows and pastures with forest, heading into the forest. We also see galactical realms, galaxy realms, which is the photo depicts here. But they also have this sense, while they're accompanying the dying, of acquiring special types of knowledge, insights into the nature of reality. More than anything else, this accompanying with the dying provides this acquiring of special knowledge. There's also a border, a boundary by which the experiencer is not able to pass through, but of course the dying does. They do transgress that, and of course, do not return to their human life. So the case we're going to see here is a very vivid one. Vivid because it's described very well by Cynthia. Cynthia's going to be talking about an experience she had with her husband. This happened about 15, 20 minutes after her husband had actually died through medical terms. He stopped breathing. But she's meditating right next to his body. And this is the experience she has. Now, keep in mind, her partner's name is Shar. And you're going to be seeing Shar and Cynthia ascending into the afterlife.
So I remember lifting up out of my form, my body, and then taking my husband, his name was Shar, by the hand and pulling him up. And then I pulled him up past me, and then he pulled me up past him, and we kept doing that for a long time. I don't really know. So a lot of stuff was probably going on that I don't know about. And the sensation was very freeing. He was fully intact. He wasn't mentally compromised then. There was no sensation of constraint or discomfort from anybody's body. And then I saw the light. I almost feel corny saying that, but I saw the light, and it's not like a a pinpoint light. It's a, you know, it's huge light. And I told him that, look, there's the light. And we both turned towards it and went towards it. And then his mother appeared. And in the experience of the light, there was a complete wholeness sensation for me. A lot of freedom was in that. A lot, you know, any of my own psychology wasn't there. None of that was there. It was just that opportunity to experience that. And then his mother reached to him, and then he reached to her, and he looked. He was still holding my hand, and he looked back at me and said, you know, but I want to stay with you. And then he slipped away. And that was, I think that was it. I don't remember too much after that.
So Cynthia describes our third mode of participation, in which she actually accompanies her partner, husband, Shar, into the initial stages of the afterlife. Once again, main theme here, main themes: ascension, moving towards the light, which Cynthia is quite actually, she's more of a researcher. So she's in geology, actually, is her specialty. So she's more scientifically oriented. So you can see she's a little uncomfortable with more of these, you know, kind of new agey thoughts, if you will, about the afterlife. So she felt uncomfortable even saying, I feel corny even mentioning the light, but it was there. And we see this in a lot of our cases. And then Cynthia sees Shar's mother. So this is a vision of a deceased relative in the afterlife. And then she hands off Shar in a certain way. We call this the handoff. When the shared death experiencer hands off the loved one, the departing loved one, to another loved one in the afterlife. So yeah, beautiful case. We call it accompanying. And it's very similar to the next case, next mode of participation, which we're going to go into, which is assisting the dying. Very similar to accompaniment, but the participants or the SDE experiencers report that they felt like they were called in to help assist or guide the dying in the transition. And in many cases, the SDE experiencer kind of finds themselves in the afterlife with their departing, dying loved one, and are kind of shocked. And then they realize they're there to help, but they may not even have any idea how to help. And the wisdom and knowledge for how to assist comes to them in that moment. Now, the case we're going to see here is with Mark. Mark is actually in New Jersey, having just finished a week of having led a group of people in a kind of outdoor education program. He's in the passenger seat and kind of tired and reflecting when he has this experience. He knows his father is not doing well in a hospital in Canada, but he doesn't know that his father's dying at this moment.
You know, there's that connection that we have with other people that we love, you know, like in particular with my father, I had that connection, and I still do. I could feel my father. I was like, I need to check in on him, you know, and so I send my spirit to the hospital where I knew he was. I remember going to him at his bedside and speaking to him and saying, you know, Dad, it's like, why don't you just let go? You know, Mom's going to be all right. You know, all us kids are going to be all right. You know, you can go. Like, there's nothing holding you here anymore. And he looks at me. The puzzlement was in his face as he said, I don't know how. I knew right away, as soon as I was there with my dad, picked him up. And I started that meditation, you know, walking down this particular trail. And then at a certain point, turn and step up these stairs and walking towards the light. So we're walking side by side. And I took him to the light. And as we got close, my father and my grandmother had a really, really close and beautiful and amazing, magical relationship. As we got close to the light, you know, there's like a doorway where the luminosity of the light coming out of there was just was unbelievable. And my grandmother steps out of that light, and she's standing there. And my dad, the look on his face was just so peaceful and beautiful. And as we approached the light, my grandmother and my uncle both, first my grandmother stepped out of the light. Yeah, they were yeah, very, very close. And so again, it's the look of joy on his face when he saw my grandmother was just like a look I hadn't seen in his face in years and years and years. And he just went and hugged her. And my uncle came out of the light at that point. And he joined the fray, and the three of them were just the joy was just unbelievable. And none of them touched me. They were very, 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 very clearly that I wasn't part of that group. But that my job was done. Like, I brought my dad there, and now like they had it. Was really how it felt. And they didn't speak to me either. And then my dad, he just turns and looks at me, and it's just this huge smile on his face, and he just said, I didn't know that it was this easy. I woke the next morning, and the phone rang, and it was for me. And I answered the phone. I said, it was my brother. And he said, Dad passed away. And I said, yeah, I know.
So Mark shares an experience with his father. This is a remote SDE. It is the fourth mode of participation, which we call guiding the dying through the transition process. You see a number of key themes here. One is that obviously Mark sees his father clearly. He then is communicating with his father, dialogue in the afterlife here, and he understands his father needs help because his father expresses that he doesn't know how to do the transition, and Mark begins to help him. Mark picks him up, as he says, and he starts walking. And notice the way that he's walking. He talks about walking upward. We see the theme of ascension again. We also see the theme of moving towards the light, because Mark's grandmother, his father's father, comes out of that light, appears, and then there's this reunion between Mark's father and his grandmother. Keep in mind, what's interesting here is Mark is not seeming to have much of a dialogue or conversation with the deceased relatives. This is very common. It seems the focus is almost always on conducting the transition, and all that appears in the afterlife in terms of spirit beings and deceased relatives are focused on this great event of facilitating the transition and lovingly welcoming the dying home in a certain way. The embrace that Mark describes between his father and his father's mother is just so filled with joy and love, and it's beautiful. And then the uncle, another deceased relative, comes out and also joins in the welcoming. We call this a type of welcoming party, very common in the shared death experience. And then Mark says that they go into the light, but he realizes he can't go any further. In fact, as he's observing this, he realizes he's at the end of his line, and he even says, I've kind of done what I was supposed to do, and he's back in his body. So profound experience. That's our fourth mode of participation. And now we're going to go into the after effects. So as I've said all along, I keep saying this, the value in the SDE, for all its spectacular phenomena, is dwarfed by the positive after effects, many of which are therapeutically beneficial. So the first one we see, and I should say, these percentages are low numbers. And that's because the way that I conduct the interviews with our research participants is that we do what we call semi-structured interviews. We do not lead our interviewees in any particular direction. So we wouldn't be asking them specifically questions. We do so more now because we're past, we're in another stage of our research where we're looking specifically for specific themes and patterns and after effects. So, but in the initial stages, which is why these numbers are low, we just asked them how this experience impact them. We didn't ask specific questions like, do you believe your loved one is alive and well somewhere? So these are unsolicited responses. So 67%, over 2/3, believe that their loved one is alive and well. 87% were convinced of an afterlife, and they often came out of nowhere just saying, I'm absolutely convinced. I know, that's a term we hear all the time. I know there's an afterlife. And in fact, they often say things like, oh, that realm I was in is more real than this human existence. Like this human existence is a dream. It sits inside the greater reality of that afterlife dimension I was in. We also find that almost 70%, 69% exactly, express a grief process, a process of grief that is more beneficial or more enhanced than typical grief. Now, as a psychotherapist, I did this assessment because I know what typical grief processes are, and I asked certain questions. And what we realized is that our SDE experiencers were expressing grief patterns that were, while they had a heartache and were bereft at the loss of a loved one, they also had a larger context of meaning and understanding to hold the loss in. And so their grief reconciliation, as we call it, was much improved. So the next element we hear is 52% reported a reduced fear of death. I am sure that's much higher. It's closer to 80, 90%. But we didn't ask that question specifically. And for those of you who do near-death experience research, you'll know that is a key finding as an impact of NDEs, is a reduction in fear and anxiety about death. Renewed life purpose. This is something we thought was fascinating, that often our respondents would say, you know, I came back from that experience and I changed everything. I felt like my life had meaning. I understood why I was in this life. I changed my work. I reviewed my relationships, and I let go of relationships that weren't meaningful to me, and I focused on other new relationships or deepening others. And so we call this renewed life purpose. I think another piece that we're going to get to a little bit later, I'll get to that later, but I'll mention it right now, and that is that a key after effect also is this sense that people are sure, they're certain they're going to see their loved one again. But I'll talk about that at the very end when I wrap the things up. So here's the cutting edge of the research right now. We have not published on this yet, but this is an aspect of the SDE that I find the most fascinating. It seems that there is a force in the afterlife, or at least at the moment of transition. And I think it's better said at the moment of transition, that is guiding, managing, and facilitating this process of a soul departing or dropping a human body and entering into the initial stages of the afterlife. In other words, it's the continuation of consciousness beyond human death. And it appears to take some management. And that's the conductor. That's a term I named because they seem like they're conducting a variety of influences or forces or elements to make this transition smooth and peaceful. So the conductor appears in a variety of forms. It can appear as a human, a larger than life human typically. It can also appear as an angel, and we'll hear a case about that in a moment. Sometimes the conductor is not seen, it's sensed. It's like, I felt there was a force operative there. I felt like there was some other energy that was managing or driving this process of transition. The conductor, when seen, seems to have a personality type. and that is, when I said it's kind of a strong term, but I'm a psychotherapist. So, you know, it seems to have these features. It has a sense of intention. It's often has a sense of urgency. It's purposeful. It can rush. It can be rushing. It can direct other spirit beings around it, or it can even give directions, as we'll see in a moment, to the caregiver loved ones. So let's go into this. And the first case we're going to see is Angela H. She is with her mother-in-law, and she is at bedside when two angels appear, one larger and the second seeming to be what I would call an apprentice, learning how to be a conductor of sorts. Before we get started, Angela is going to be telling the story, but keep in mind, the story she's going to be telling is about her mother-in-law, and that man to her left, or to our left, her right, is her husband. So she's talking about the death of his mother.
I didn't particularly have a close relationship with her, unfortunately. I wished it had been, it was close at the end. Jean, my mother-in-law, she wasn't with it. She was completely unconscious, and she wasn't even being fed. She was on heavy medication now. As I went into the kitchen and I just glanced over, I noticed that the room was a welcoming gold colour, and it looked as though you wanted to be in there. As I got to the room, it felt like the whole room was in some kind of a bubble, and not to enter it. I felt as though I shouldn't go into that room. So, but as I noticed, Jean had something not out of her head, but in like the centre of her body here, was about a foot away from her body, and it was translucent, and it was moving out of her body, but you could see through it. I couldn't believe it. And in the corner of the room, the very corner to the left, in the corner, there was a massive angel with huge wings. It was like a bird, white wings. I say it's an angel. I don't know. It didn't even have a head, to be honest with you. But it was a white being. It was white. It wasn't translucent. And its wings were moving with the tips of them, moving inwards like that. Beckoning motion, a strong beckoning. I thought I couldn't believe it. And she was like moving. She wasn't shape, she was just translucent, irregular ball, not even a ball, it was irregular shape. It wasn't a shape of a person or anything. And it was moving up to this white being that was doing this movement, but there was another smaller one, the other side, doing the same movement. Exactly, and there was a very, very, very high-pitched tone, and it felt as though this was all included with the bubble that was in this whole room. This white being seemed to turn to me in quite a, I don't know how to put this, in quite a, it was telepathically, but it turned to me, it didn't even have a head, but it turned to me and it said to me, wait, wait. And this other little one, the other side, seemed to turn to it in a panicking kind of way, as if to say, what are we going to do now? And was doing it as well. They were going a bit faster and a bit of an urgency going on. So I said to Dorothy, she's definitely died. And with that, Dorothy come barging past me into the room. And as she got into the room, and she disappeared into the corner.
This is a really beautiful description that Angela is providing for us, and she's not holding anything back. So a couple key features here. Notice there are two angels. She describes them as angels. They're light beings. One seems to be in charge. That's the conductor. And notice the behaviors of the conductor. I love this description of it kind of having wings and moving in a way that I hope you can see me, kind of coaxing the spirit out of her mother-in-law, Jean. And the manner of which this large angel is conducting itself is one of purpose, is directing, and there's an urgency. And she even gives Angela kind of a directive, like wait. So really managing the space, if you will, to facilitate this transition of of Jean, who is Angela's mother-in-law. There's a lot of other features in this, but I think we're going to leave it at that for right now. Is there anything? Oh, yes, I think it's fascinating that little angel is being trained, and that Angela sees this. It just seems just like the spirit realm is so organized in a certain way. Why wouldn't it be? But anyway, fascinating case. Okay, next one here. So I'm going to talk about a case that I had. I'm going to do it briefly, because my father died about 2 years ago. In fact, 2 years ago on September the 20th. And I was at bedside on one side of bed with my mother, and then my sister was on the other side on my mother's side. And he was very close to death, and I was doing what I typically do when I'm with the dying, and that is I was gently holding my father's hand. I was actually had my hand on his pulse, and then I closed my eyes and I matched my breathing to his breathing, and his breathing was getting labored. And in one moment, I had a vision. To the left side, above the foot of the bed, I saw my grandmother and my aunt, both who had predeceased, and then I saw my grandfather as well. My grandfather, who I'd never met, but I knew it was my grandfather. And there are a number of details, but the piece I want to share with you is that it was clear that my father was ready to die. And I was talking to my grandmother saying, and to my aunt, they were right next to each other, saying, why aren't you taking him? I could see this beautiful cylinder of light coming down like a stairway, about a quarter of the way down from where they were, in a slanted direction to my father, which would be to my father's heart or head. And I said, why aren't you taking him? He's ready to go. He's kind of suffering a bit here. He wasn't suffering that much, but he was certainly ready to go. And my grandmother and aunt, in unison, kind of looked at me and then averted their gaze to draw my attention to just over the top of my father's bed, right over his heart, but about 4 feet above, even higher than they were. Maybe it was more like 6 feet above. But point being is, I moved my attention over. And when I locked my attention to where they were directing me, it wasn't that I tried to lock, it's that I kind of resonated with this in a gravitational way. And I felt a pull on my heart. Some people talk about this electromagnetic nature of our soul spirit. And I felt that resonating and pull and come alive. And then I realized, they were averting my gaze as if to say, he's in charge or she's in charge, but it felt like a he. And I'm like, oh, and I was taken back, and I thought, that's the conductor. It's the conductor. And I felt the power and force and strength of the conductor who was waiting. It was clear that the conductor was not quite my father's time. And then about 20 minutes later, there was this kind of gentle whoosh upward, and my father was gone. And the room does what it does, is the way I feel it. It kind of empties out energetically. And that force, that resonant field, diminishes greatly. There's even a feeling of coolness after the death of somebody. And I learned this from my years working in hospice. So that's what I want to share with you. I go into it in great more detail, in my book, At Heaven's Door. But there's a bit of a summary about it. So I want to say a few more things by way of closing, because I know we're about at the end of our time here. So you may be asking, well, how does the healthcare system respond to SDEs? And the truth of the matter is, our current healthcare system does not know much about the SDEs at all. They're just finally getting used to near-death experiences. I think most people in the healthcare system are familiar with near-death experiences. At least there's a general acceptance or acknowledgement that they happen. But there's no understanding for SDEs and NDEs. And if they do happen, you're likely to get one of three responses. A healthcare provider that's curious, but neutral, but unable to be supportive. Unable to be supportive because they don't want to be seen as supporting hallucinations or delusions or, psychotically problematic expressions. They can also be dismissive. This is very common, where they can just simply say, oh, you're under a great deal of stress, your loved one's dying or died or what have you, and go home and get some rest, and I think you'll realize those experiences are hallucinations. Sometimes they can be downright harmful, and they can basically say, I think you need a psychological evaluation. And in which cases, they get a psychological evaluation and they're diagnosed with some form of psychoses or grief hallucinations or delusional disorder, or something like that. These are all highly problematic and harmful to the experiencer, because it then forces them to interpret their most profound spiritual experience as a delusion of their brain. And that is highly problematic. So why is this? Well, our current view of medical sciences of consciousness is that consciousness is created by the brain. And when the human body dies, the brain dies with it. And therefore, there can be no communication or connection with the consciousness, soul, spirit, call it whatever you want, with the deceased person. So we have a fundamental problem with medical sciences when it comes to the SDE, because the SDE would assert that the consciousness of the dying has survived human death and is now seeking to, or at least available to be in relationship with departed loved ones and healthcare providers even. So this is the stumbling block we have. And I think there is some movement here, though. I think that the newer forms of appreciation of consciousness are evolving. And I think you're going to see certainly more progressive providers making space for these types of experiences. But what's really important is that there is incredible therapeutic value when somebody shares a story like an SDE or other shared crossings and they feel supported. Unfortunately, most of our participants, or not most, but 38% reported a concern about sharing their story for being dismissed or ridiculed. So this is why a lot of people have these experiences and don't share them. Every interviewee in our study expressed gratitude and appreciation for the opportunity to share their story, and it affirmed them. And then they felt empowered to go out and share their story with others, which is great. So in conclusion, remote shared death experiences are more common than bedside ones. They are highly beneficial because they yield in the SDE experiencer a certainty of the afterlife, a benevolent afterlife, and a knowing that they'll be reunited with their loved ones. Over 40% of our SDE experiencers reported having more than one. This suggests there's a capacity to have an SDE. And in fact, I'll talk about that in just a moment. And 78% of our experiencers had other shared crossings. That means that they typically had other after-death forms of communications like post-death visions, visitations, direct communication, and other synchronicities suggesting communication across the veil. Finally, 25%, a quarter of our interviewees, reported ongoing relationships with the departed. So if you want to learn more about SDEs, I suggest you come to our story library at our sharedcrossing.com. You can hear video accounts of other people's SDEs. Also, my book that Marion, thank you, Marion, for bringing this up in the beginning. This is the seminal book that's research-based on the shared death experience. There will be more coming. I can tell you my colleagues are writing books right now, but this is the first one that has 28 really wonderful stories culled from over 150 cases. And the reviews have been thankfully quite good. So if you're interested, please consider that.
Fantastic.
Finally, I want to say that if you've had an experience, you can submit it to the Shared Crossing Research Initiative. We are always collecting cases, and we would appreciate you submitting because they help others learn about it. Lastly, or second to last, is I want to announce a free webinar that I'll be doing with my colleague, Dr. Martha Jo Atkins. This is, we call Finding the Pathway Home, an introduction to methods, the methods that enable shared crossing. So if you want to have a shared crossing experience, we'll be introducing the methods here. And Martha Jo is pretty well known in the field. She's actually has a TED Talk on pre-death dreams and visions that's been viewed over 1.8 million times. And finally, this is the flagship program that we offer, the Shared Crossing Pathways. It is a program that teaches you how to have the SDE, accompany a loved one into a beautiful end of life and afterlife. And we'll do this both in Santa Barbara in 3 weeks over the weekend, but you can also do it online on November 11th. So with that, I'm going to say thank you, and I'll turn it over to you, Marion.
Okay, we still have 20 minutes left for the Q&A, and I hope somebody will join in.
I just wanted to say I enjoyed learning about the shared experience of afterlife. The shared experience of transitioning. I've written some stuff on this subject about 20 years ago with experiences that my family and my brother had. They were incredible. So thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Charles. I appreciate that. And I'm glad that you're writing about this and adding to the literature in the field, because the more people who can talk about these experiences, the more we validate it.
I lost my husband about 13 years ago. And that morning when he didn't wake up, he passed during the night. I was trying to get him up the usual way. We had a doctor appointment. He needed to get hydrated. I had a ritual of what we did in the morning, and he just, was laying there not participating. And I'm not good at waking up people. So I thought, well, I'll make some household sounds. And then I finally decided I'm going to get in the shower and get ready for the doctor appointment. And in the shower, I thought to myself, I wonder if Rick passed away last night. And I went over to the bed, and he was facing the east. And I could see he wasn't there anymore, not him, just his body. So I was in therapy, and I had a therapist who was of the same kind of thinking that people like us are. It was a wonderful presentation, by the way. Thank you so much. So all I wanted to add to that was, I told her about my experience, and she said, you know how he was, he was your husband. My husband was a firefighter. When we had a big earthquake, how I woke up was he was rolling over me to protect me. So she said, I think he was telling you, warning you, he wasn't going to be there when you got to the bed, that he knew that could soften your understanding of him leaving. So that's not much compared to the kinds of studies you have, but can you tell me anything about that?
Let me see if I can understand this, Betty. So you're in the shower and you have a sense that he's died. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
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 Yeah, you had an intuitive sense that you thought he had died, and you're suggesting that perhaps he had come to you to tell you that.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, that certainly makes sense. I literally have a case from a colleague right here in Santa Barbara, whose husband died a little over a year ago. And she said she was at his bedside at 10 o'clock in the morning. She got out to go to just quickly. She had been with him all night, sleeping beside him. And she went into take a shower. And in the shower, she felt him come by her and say, "Thank you. I love you." In no words, just she felt this whoosh of love came over her. And she goes, "Oh, I think he just died." She got out of the shower quickly. She wasn't in the shower more than 2 minutes, dried off, ran into the room, and she said, "He's died." And she goes, "That was him saying goodbye. I don't think he wanted to die with me right next to him. I think he wanted to do it this way. He thought it might be easier for me or something." So yes, these types of communications from the deceased to us as surviving loved ones happen in a variety of forms. I agree with your therapist. Trust your intuition about that he came to you to give you a message, that he died and everything was okay.
I just want to thank you again for your spending your time and sharing with us all that. I can't wait to get your book. I'm assuming it's at Amazon.
Yeah, no, the book, my publisher, Simon & Schuster, you can get it anywhere, thankfully. They're really good. I would ask you this, that if you get the book and review it in whatever way, this goes for everybody, if you could review the book on Amazon, even briefly, it really helps, because my publisher said the book is a bestseller, but we haven't got the number of reviews that would match with the sales. Yes, Pamela, go ahead.
I have read and heard that when people are ready to pass, that it's almost better if the people that are here or their loved ones are not present, because it holds the spirit back from passing over. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that does happen in my experience. I think that happens in about a third of the cases. It's very interesting. Why do I say a third? Because that's not based on research. I can just tell you that I work with and have worked with, hundreds and hundreds of people. And oftentimes I'll hear something like, "I was with my loved one all the time. I just went to get something to eat or go to the bathroom or what have you. And can you believe he or she died at that moment?" Well, I think you're right, Pamela. I think there's something sometimes when we're close to our loved ones and we're connecting with them as we want to, that connection emotionally, it serves as a bit of a weight or a hook that keeps them here. And keep in mind, the research suggests that there are spirits and loved ones on the other side who are beckoning our loved ones home. It's their time to come home, and they're waiting for them, and they want them to cross over and be with them. So there's a pull here, and between kind of caught in a tug of war in a good way, on our deceased relatives in the afterlife, and then us here in the human realm. I think when we leave and let our loved ones be alone, I think they respond to the pull of the deceased relatives. So that's the way I look at it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. But you should always say, Pamela, one thing I say to everybody, it's very important to say to our loved ones, it's okay for you to go. I love you. Thank you. Goodbye. You need to go when it's right for you. It breaks my heart to see you go, but you need to go. And I think when you say that, they tend to be more willing to leave with us present.
Can I tell you a quick story about my mother when she passed?
Sure.
My mother was in North Carolina, and my sister had called us and said, "I don't think she's going to last long." So my younger sister and I both headed to the airport. She's in Boston, I was in New York, and to get on the plane. And when I got to the airport in New York, I met a medium, and the man, I hadn't seen him in many years. As soon as I saw him and I touched his hand, I went into a different state. I felt like I was surrounded by Mary and flowers. The smell of flowers was overwhelming. And it was almost like this man was sent there, by my mother. But anyway, that's not the story. We get to the Carolinas, and my mother had already passed. We get to the funeral home, and my sister said, well, mom's inside. She doesn't look the same. So just understand this. So we go in, and this woman is in the coffin, and we're saying goodbye. And I'm saying, she doesn't look like her at all. And my sister said the same thing. We came out, we get back home to my sister's house. We get a call from the funeral parlor. It was not my mother. It was another lady who had passed, Mrs. Ray. I'll never forget her. She was alone. Nobody had come to claim her.
Oh, wow.
And I swear it was my mother's sense of humor sending us in there to say goodbye to her. So I expect to see Mrs. Ray at the pearly gates when I get there.
For sure.
That is a great story, Pamela.
Oh, yeah, it was. And then when we were at the house, we took pictures of all of us at the house. And these pictures of all of us, in every single picture, Dr. Peters, there was an orb, a white light orb.
Yeah.
Meaning that my mother was present. She was right there with us.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, good on you. That's lovely that you captured that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela. I don't have anything else to add other than, I guess, talk about these experiences with, I think they happen far more frequently than we know. And I would suggest that the path we saw with the near-death experience getting gradually more accepted in the community, in our culture, the shared death experience is undergoing the first steps in that right now, and it's rapidly accelerating. So it's a great service you provide to your loved ones and to your community members to talk about these experiences, because we normalize them, and you'll be shocked how many people have them. I'm pretty sure about 20 to 25% of the modern American public will recognize this experience when it's explained to them. That's kind of what I just gave a class at a college here in town, Santa Barbara, and there were, I don't know, maybe 60 people there, and I asked them, they were just basic class on psychology, and I just asked them how many people have had an experience like this, and 15, 20 hands went up. And I said, have you ever shared it with anybody else? Like, not one hand came up. Nobody talks about these experiences. That's where we have to do, as a community, and you guys in your community, very progressive, very spiritual, very forward thinking. That's where the conversations start in spiritually oriented, forward, consciously oriented communities. So with that, I just say thank you. And please consider, sharing about these programs, because we also feel that we can learn how to have these shared death experiences. I can tell you anecdotally, we're going to do a study coming up, but I think between 25 and 40% of the people that I've trained will have an SDE when they're around a death, which is pretty significant. But then about 90%, and I'm only saying that because that's leaving out a conservative number there, using a conservative number, will report some sort of shared crossing. That means the trainings that we do, the way we help people prepare for end of life, because really the preparation is for conscious, connected, and loving end of life experiences. That's the general training. And then we teach methods to have the shared death experience. That training seems to open people up, and they have visitations after the death, or lots of synchronicity. So it's like, as one person said, it's like that training, working with your team, opened me up to my whole spiritual connection with the spirit realm, and anyone who'd ever died, I seem to have more contact with. And that is a beautiful way to be in the world, when that veil gets thinner and thinner, and it's like, yeah, our loved ones die, but we still have relationships with them. And that is really beautiful. And I think that's the world we're heading towards, where death it gets less and less of a boundary. It's significant, but we still have a continuing bond with everyone we love. So with that, I'll say thank you. And I wish everyone well.